um, which one reviewer has described as a definitive, damning account of the history of palm oil production and the ecological destruction it causes. JOCELYN, it's a provocative subject of something that none of us is really aware of when we eat our food and we see it wallowing in, as Pakistani and Indian food is, in palm oil. But we look forward to a very informative interaction. Bittu, over to you.
Well, there we are, JOCELYN. I have one question for you to start with, JOCELYN. I mean, where did this start? Were you a fighter from the start, or did you evolve into one, or what? Because you've taken on the world virtually now.
I don't think I really was. I grew up in a family with 5 kids, so it was just, I think I was just lost in the chaos. But I would probably trace it to the early 1990s. I served as a Peace Corps volunteer. Are you familiar with Peace Corps?
Very much so.
So I went to, I ended up in a tiny village in Western Kenya on the border of Uganda, very poor, and spent 2 years living there in that village. And I think just, really opened my eyes to the way that most of the world lives, very different from my upbringing in New Jersey. And beautiful countryside, clear rivers, intact rainforests. So I got very attached to that village and to the people there. And as I said, it kind of opened my mind as to, the way that most of the world lives. And then when I went, I was working for a magazine called On Earth, which you're probably familiar with. It was the magazine of the Natural Resources Defense Council. And I had pitched to my editors a story about land grabs. This was 2014. And as you know, that's a phenomenon that was happening sort of in many places, particularly places where the governance isn't great and where corporations or governments could go in and take up big swaths of fertile land and kicking people off of it. Anyway, I went to Liberia to report that story, in part because of the historical connection to the States. And I got down to Liberia and saw that there was this oil palm growing everywhere. And as Neela mentioned, I worked at Gourmet Magazine for 12 years and had written, about food and about environment and agriculture. And I really knew nothing about palm oil. So the plant is the oil palm. Palm oil is the product that you get to it. And so when I was in Liberia, I spoke to people who'd been kicked off their land, the land that their families had lived on for generations, and said that their rivers had been polluted with these pesticides and agrochemicals. Anyway, it was a devastating trip. We would drive for miles and miles, and parts where they were just about to plant, they just knocked down the tropical rainforest, primary rainforest, just for miles and miles, just dirt. And then in other places, they had already knocked down the rainforest years before and planted this oil palm. And again, just this landscape, all the same. We got lost numerous times because you're driving around and it's just, everything looks the same. Monoculture to the extreme. Yeah. It was that Liberia trip. I sort of came back, and it's basically on the same latitude as my village was in Western Kenya. So it felt very personal to me. I felt like, this could be all my friends and my students from my village who'd lost their land and their livelihoods, their everything, their culture. So that's when I got a little bit militant, I guess.
Well, you're actually narrating a story that exists in every single continent. It's always been like this. In the old days, they used guns, and the colonizers came down, and that was that, and you were either dead or alive. But now the colonizing has taken a different route. It's commercial, it's economic, and I really want to know, I mean, this particular book, I want to know a little bit about it from you, the author, and I would call it a magnum opus of sorts. What made you write this? Why the book per se? And why are you not an activist going out over there, banner waving and things like this? What do you think the book will do?
I hope it will educate people. I mean, as I said, I was somebody who thought I knew a lot about sort of global South issues, agriculture, environment, and I knew nothing about palm oil. And as we know, it's particularly in India. I want to hear from you because my reporting in India I did 2 years ago, possibly 3 years ago. So I'll be interested to hear from you, sort of where things have gone. But it's in everything, and I just feel like people should be aware of, not just what they're putting into their bodies, but what impact it's having on the other side of the world. And now, given the climate change crisis, it's the impact that we're all feeling. The idea that we're knocking down tropical rainforests for this garbage that we're putting in our bodies, it's just, it's nonsense. So.
Yeah, I mean, India's flirted with palm oil as well. I mean, a couple of decades ago, I was down in the Little Andaman Island, way down south, below Kanyakumari in India, and 4,000 acres of land, exactly the same thing. It had been cut down, and they put palm oil, and it failed. And why did it fail? Because there was a beetle infestation. And when the beetle infestation came, they threw pesticides in. And when the pesticides were thrown in, it raised the price to the point where it just became uneconomical. So they said, oh my God, no, we made a mistake. So let's go to another 4,000 acres and let's try a new palm oil and let's try and do a less dangerous pesticide. The point is basically that, I mean, it's like mange creeping over the whole world, And Little Andaman, surely that was a resistance movement at that point. But right now, the way I see what I haven't read your book cover to cover yet, but I'll tell you this, that I thought I'll skip 10 pages, but I found myself intrigued. I mean, are we now talking from blood diamonds to blood palm? What are we talking about now? What's going to happen?
I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, that's what I wanted to ask about India, because when I was there, it was mostly imports, but I know the government was talking about planting more palm oil. So, but do you know what the status of that is?
Yeah, we know the laws are being changed to facilitate palm oil and other monocultures, and India has some of the finest environmental laws in the world. We put these together because we had anticipated climate change. We had anticipated the fact that forests feed rivers and aquifers, and those laws, including our coastal regulation zone rules, were so perfect. Now they're being dismantled, not by this government or that government, any government that comes in. And right now, what I would call the last hope that we have, that biodiversity will be protected as it was, apart from our Andaman Islands, is the northeast of India and the Western Ghats of peninsular India. And it looks to me like there's going to be a very strong pitch. First change the law, then sell the idea to people who own that land. And because in the northeast you have communities that have rights over the land, that you'll be better off as farmers. So I would be very interested in knowing very specifically what was the experience of people in Indonesia, Malaysia. What is the state of the farmers now, the guys whose lands were taken for this? And in this case, it's not just farmland as you might imagine. I mean, their slash and burn in the northeast has been a part and parcel of life. So this idea of cutting down a forest and then allowing it to grows. But right now, the way I mean, we're meeting in Paris and we're meeting in Rio and we're meeting here and we're meeting there and we're meeting everywhere and we're going like a talking machine. What's going to happen? I mean,
time is running out. I don't know. I mean, one has to hope that given what we're seeing with climate change, right? I think 10 years ago it was an abstraction. Maybe even 3 years ago, for a lot of people, it was still an abstraction. But now with the floods and the fires, and I just feel like, and the heat waves, that people are feeling it more immediately. And that's my hope, that we can get our act together, because as you know, we have so little time before it's just irreversible. So.
Well, JOCELYN, in India there's a small little catchy saying कि कुंभकर्ण को जगाना बहुत आसान है, लेकिन वो जो ढोंग कर रहा है सोने का, उसको कैसे जगाओगे? In other words, it's easy to wake up Rip Van Winkle when he's sleeping, but how can you wake somebody up when they're pretending to sleep? Yeah, so I think we had the same thing happening with prawn farms across our coast. The coastal regulation zone rules were written. They were written because we knew the tides were going to be higher and higher and the storms were going to get worse and worse, even back in the 90s. And those rules were broken. And it looks now that India might actually become the new El Dorado for those people who want to invest in monocultures. We've got tea, we've got coffee, we've got all these things which came up. I think this will be the last straw on the camel's back. And I wonder now, are we going to see a fresh crop of United Fruit Companies shifting focus from Central America to India? Is that going to be the new oil? Literally
Well,
the new oil?
yeah, I don't know that they're going to shift focus, because I don't think they're leaving Central America. I mean, in my book, I compare a lot of the land where they're now growing oil palm in Honduras and Guatemala was actually United Fruit Company. They used to grow bananas there, United Fruit Company. So, and you know, now these companies are doing the same thing, dispossessing the people and you know, polluting their soil and their rivers with the agrochemicals. So, you know, I hope that this oil palm revolution isn't creeping towards India, but I don't. As I said, I don't think it's going to be going away from Central America or Africa.
Well, there'll be copycats then. There'll be people saying, if they can do it, why can't we? Now the law allows us to do it. The thing is that it's
But
not.
when I was in India, people were saying, I described in my book that even though they were consuming a lot of palm oil, Indians, that there was like a stigma. There was a stigma to it. Like I went into one shop. I was with some people from the Public Health Foundation of India, and we asked for palm oil in a shop, and the shopkeeper said, "I don't have any palm oil. I only have, you know, mustard, rape." And then he showed us those oils, and we said, "No, we really need something cheap." And then he said, "Well, okay." And he sort of reached down and he said, he actually did have palm oil. And then there were other people, the street vendors. I asked one what kind of oil he was frying his pastries in, snacks, and I believe he told me soy oil. But right underneath his frying thing, I saw the packet for Rushi Gold, that it was actually palm oil. So is that and then other people, somebody from the Food Safety Authority told me that even like commercial bottles of mustard or rape often are diluted with palm oil because it's so much cheaper. One person said, like, there's not one brand that you can trust to be sort of 100% pure, the kind of oil that it's saying. Is that something you're familiar with, or?
I'm very familiar with this. I'm very familiar, sadly, very familiar with the fact that it's not just India, it's every country in the world now. You know, if they can bend a rule, they'll bend it. And if they can't bend it, they'll try to break it. And if they can't break it, they'll break the guys who are trying to uphold the rule, you know. So it's a tough...
That's the idea of the stigma, because I know, I mean, Indian cuisine is such a proud part of your culture, and I know that the different traditional oils are such an important part of it, that it does seem like, you know, why would people be sort of, other than the cheap price, why would they be happy using palm?
Well, JOCELYN, it's like this, that it's one thing as to why they would be using palm, but let me tell you this, that the story for palm is exactly the same as the story was for cigarettes. At one time, people said it was good for you, and then they hid it, and then the big corporations came in, and they spun a whole lot of, you know, tales around how good it was. DDT, pesticides, same thing over a period of time. Now, at this particular point in time, the elasticity of time that we had then in the 70s, 80s, we don't have that elasticity of time now, because that's just been snapped away from us because of the fact that climate change is moving rapidly, much faster than even the most dark predictions were. So in this situation, we were speaking before we came on in front of these wonderful people about the Dasgupta review. I mean, that is something which clearly states, for instance, that if you destroy ecosystems and if you destroy species, now whether you destroy it for a dam or a road or a mine, or whether you destroy it because the wildlife trade, it's a miserable $40 billion trade in the world today, it's caused a $40 trillion economic loss to the world. So it's clear this is not an economic win-win. This is a hardcore economic loss that's going to take place. It's who's going to profit, who's going to pay is one part of it. But the climate has gone out of kilter. And the biosphere doesn't give you any judgment. JOCELYN, you're such a lovely person because you wrote this book. Or BITTU SAHGAL, look at you and JOCELYN, look what they're doing. You're such a nice guy. It's just going to give you warnings and then consequences. And those warnings and consequences are stark. What we're seeing now is just the tip of the proverbial iceberg. We don't know the heavyweight damage that's going to be done to health, internal migration, huge impact on the economies of the world. Even the people who are driving palm oil, or who were driving diamonds, or who were driving coal or oil or cigarettes or whatever you call it, those are going to be major sufferers. And I'd really like to know from you, from your perspective. You've written this book sitting in Brooklyn. I know the Trump era and it came and went, but I really worry that much of this, well, let's hope, but my real worry is that, I work with people who care for and have done remarkable work for children affected by, the spastic society at one time. And they described that awful thing as intelligent minds in disobedient bodies. And I wonder, all of us, are we now intelligent minds in disobedient lifestyles? I work with young people. My audience is actually something like average age of 12 to 16, 18,
Okay.
And they are very angry.
They have good reason to be.
They have very good reason to be. They're angry, and I think that what you said,
we've screwed them over.
Forget my generation. We're in the departure lounge, We've got another few years. It's the guys in the arrival lounge. My life is dedicated, and I think so is yours, to making sure the arrival lounges are clean, functional, clean air, clean water, comfort. I'd say there's going to be a very major resistance. It has to be a consumer resistance. There are a lot of people who run large companies whose children are not interested in being labeled as the guys who advanced climate change. Yeah. But now I'm going on. I'd really like to know from you. I mean, I'm asking you a straight question on between Malaysia, Indonesia, and India. I mean, is the tiger going to become the symbol, like the, of a sinking symbol like the orang was? Is that what you see? Because I'm telling you, it's coming to India in a big way. Palm oil. This is the law. This is the policy. Everything has been declared.
So it's coming to India. Going back to my previous question, I know, and I know you know, that India is the #1 importer of palm oil. Yeah. But you're saying you're expecting forests to fall because there are going to be more and more oil palm plantations in India?
I'm more or less certain that will happen. But it's like this, that it's not that I'm against a tree or a plant called palm oil. I'm upset about where it's being put. Right. The Dasgupta review that I talked about, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity, Ecosystem Services, what they're saying is the only hope we have of escaping the worst impacts of climate change are that natural ecosystems come back, and not just rainforests. Grasslands, rainforests, mudflats, corals, you name it. They're wetlands. There's as much carbon in wetlands as exists in the atmosphere, all thereabouts, So I think that young people will resist this. But I don't know if we have the elasticity of time here in India, JOCELYN. And I really am grateful for that book you've written, because social media should be extracting stuff from you, pulling you out, putting you there, getting you to speak to people.
I know, but the thing is, the kind of people who write books are the kind of people who tend not to be, great out in front of a crowd.
You don't have that luxury. I'm sorry, you've been appointed.
Well, that's why I did this.
Yeah.
But I was just going back to, you said it's comparing it to tobacco, to cigarettes. Do you know, I think it was last year, maybe the year before, the World Health Organization actually put out a report saying that the tactics of the palm oil industry are, an echo of what the tobacco and the alcohol.
Well, really, I hadn't read that.
Okay. In terms of knowing the damage that this industry is doing, playing with the science, trying to muddy the message, and marketing, this junk food to younger people.
The irony of the whole thing is that the people who put the money into this, the bankers and things, actually very few people really know the impact of what they're doing with their money. So part of what we have strategized is not to just go into a slugfest with them. We want to explain to them that, look, you want a good reputation, you want a good brand, you want to have brand equity that paints you as a good person, not only with the market, but even your own employees. Then don't go for palm oil, or if you go for palm oil, then go for palm oil in places where there are existing farms and ask them to switch the crop, Right. So we're not
Right.
against palm oil, but yeah, go on.
Oil palm grows best at 10 degrees to the north and south of the equator, which, as you know, those tropical rainforests, those are the centers of biodiversity on the planet. So, that's just that is the worst possible place to be knocking down forests and putting in. You just said something that I wanted to.
Look,
Yeah.
the way I see it right now, if I had a crystal ball in my hand, which I have in my head right now, anybody who invests in palm oil is going to die. That money is going to go, it's going to sink.
Yeah. I mean, those are going to be stranded assets, right? Because
absolutely.
The point I wanted to make to viewers, listeners, is that a Global Witness just put out a report, I think yesterday or the day before, and it's about all the banks that have been bankrolling deforestation around the world. So I haven't read the whole report, but I sort of read the headlines, and it just seems like a great resource, and I would love for people to publicize that, because that is, the banks tend not to be linked directly. We might attach palm oil to Nestle or PepsiCo or McDonald's, some of these consumer-facing companies, but these banks are the ones that are putting up the money. So it seems like a great thing for people who are interested in this issue to get on social media about that. And
and one is to pressure the banks, as you suggested, as I suggested, and the other thing is that a very unlikely ally is going to come to work with us on this, and it's not going to be one of those sloganeering types. It's the insurance industry.
Right.
The risk premium is going to rise very, very fast, because whether they are dams in the Himalaya, whether they are all these large projects that are dependent upon the uniformity and the trust that the next monsoon will arrive between the 7th of June and the 10th of June, etc., they're all going down. And a crop like palm oil, when climate changes, please believe me that the huge investments that go into that, even though they'll make huge profits in the early stages, they are stranded assets. And I don't think that the banks will be very keen, for two reasons. One, the bank's brand equity goes down. Number two, the fact is that there will be court cases. The fact is that there will be delays. The fact is that there will be failures, and therefore capital will not be returned. So I think that this is an uphill climb, even if we didn't fight. I'm just saying the market will not allow it to survive beyond a few years, because it's like carpet bagging right now, just you're retreating everywhere else, grab what you can and run. So we've seen it before.
Yeah.
JOCELYN, I have one more question. I don't know how much time we have right now, but I have a real interesting question. It was asked of me, and it took me a while to answer. Suppose I put 10 million children in front of you right now, and they believed you and they listened to you. What would you tell them right now? Not just about palm oil, but palm oil as the touch point.
Right. Well, that we have this one planet, and this is everything about our lives is dependent on our natural resources, and that that there could be other things in front of you, TikTok or lots of distractions, but we need to take care of the planet and think long term, because that's.
Let me dig deeper. What I'm asking you is that these kids, they're passengers in this bus right now. It's my generation that's driving the bus. And we've thrown away the rear view mirror, saying, why are you looking backward? We've thrown away the brake. Why are you slowing the pace of development? And we're pressing the accelerator, but there's a cliff in front. Now the kids know this, because the kids don't have angles, and they don't have cynicism, and they are infinitely more literate than the adults are in terms of the planet and the biosphere and what's happening and climate change. So really, my answer to those kids was just as simple as this, that look, if JOCELYN or BITTU SAHGAL go and meet somebody and say, don't do this thing, it could even be misunderstood. Does this guy have an angle? Why is he doing this? Maybe he's working for a competitor. God knows what. I'm not, but the kids, their beauty is written on their face.
And they're getting there.
Yeah.
Greta is an amazing inspiration, and I see on Twitter kids from all over the world in little African villages, holding up signs that their rainforests need to be spared, and trying to alert people on the other side of the globe. So, but yeah, it's a march against time, as you know.
Yeah, it does. Yes,
it's
the story is common. We run a program, Sanctuary, the Sanctuary Nature Foundation that
Right.
we started 40 years ago. We tell the story about the tiger. We have 1 million children in our network, and we tell them a one-line story that takes 1 year to tell, and the same story can be told or should be told for palm oil or for any other monoculture crop. You can't save the tiger if you don't save the forest. If you save the forest, you happen to save all the creatures in the forest, and all of them perform a very useful function in that forest. In the process of doing that, that sponge catches the rain that falls, particularly in this belt you're talking about. That feeds the aquifers, and there's more water in the aquifers than there are in the reservoirs. And that was all we said to them, to our kids, for 30 years or so. And then we started to tell them that, look, there is another thing. Not your house plant and not the forests that you see on this frame can grow without taking carbon down from the atmosphere. So when you allow ecosystems to come back, it pulls the carbon down. So everybody fighting for climate stabilization, they're talking about geotechnical solutions, they're talking about all kinds of things, but the best solar panel in the world is a leaf, and it pulls the carbon down, it feeds us all, it holds the water down in the ground, it keeps everything. In fact, we have a one-liner that we tell kids above the age of 12 and under the age of 18, that shit makes the world go round, because there is not a single creature, not a species in the world other than Homo sapiens that has the technology to waste. Now, that's remarkable. And why? When we can turn, in India, we've done it. Project Tiger turned a lot of land back into forests, and those are feeding 600 Indian rivers. And that's, I think, the same story anywhere in this 10-degree belt north-south of the equator. These forests feed our planet. They feed our people, millions and millions, and they feed industry. And I think the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the biosphere. And this is not something that planners have fully internalized. A lot of them have, JOCELYN. I don't know about the new dispensation in America, but I'm hoping.
Yeah. Well, it's not looking good for our climate policy. But anyway, I see we've got a question in the chat. It says, JOCELYN, you call palm oil garbage. What do you call the other oils, soy, etc.? I don't know if I called palm oil garbage or if I was talking about the processed foods that palm oil tends to be. 70% of the palm oil made goes into is a food product of some sort, and a lot of it is sort of crisps and cookies, and that is garbage, I would say. I don't think palm oil. Well, it is. Palm oil is 50% saturated fat, so it has a much higher saturated fat level than most of these other oils, particularly the ones used more traditionally in India. So that's not a great thing. But soy grown in a monoculture is as bad as palm grown in a monoculture. It's it's just a system that's not sustainable. And the other thing is that you can grow soy in North Dakota. As I mentioned, oil palm grows best 10 degrees to the north and south of the equator. So I just think that's really important land. So for that reason, I would say I don't think we need as much palm oil as. We never had this much palm oil in the world before in our diets, as an oil than soy, unless,
right.
Except for the saturated fat bit. But it's the monoculture, and it's where it grows, and it's the amount that we're growing that I take issue with.
So Bharat had a follow-up question. He says that what can we as people do? What alternatives do we have? Well, let's put it like this. What we can do is to resist doing something that we know is wrong. And you'll make yourself $500. I won't do it because it's not the right thing to do. Kids have a different ethic right now. They actually have not just an investment. So I would say fats is one thing, but the fact that when you're cutting down that rainforest, or magnets that will draw the species back and lock them into their ecosystems, and if you cut these rainforests down, those species are going to spill over into our ecosystem, And this business of spillover is not a joke. AIDS, MERS, SARS, Ebola, you name it. All these diseases came from animals. They're zoonotic diseases. So we're going to have an economic collapse of the worst order. The time frame I cannot predict, but I can promise you this, that when the biosphere begins to unravel, and the process of monocultures is unraveling the biosphere, there will be no place to hide, not for rich, not for poor, not for white, not for black, not for north, not for south. We're living on a tiny little marble, and we might draw our boundaries. But JOCELYN, I loved what I read of your book, and as soon as this thing is over, I'm going to spend the next 4 days or 5 days just reading this
I
book.
just wanted to just go back, and I make a distinction in the book between palm oil grown in its natural state, which is Central and West Africa, and it's long been a part of the cuisine and the culture. It's very high in vitamin A and vitamin E, and I have no issue with that. It's mostly grown in agroforestry systems, you know, with other crops around it. And it, as I said, it has these nutrients, and it's an important part of the cuisine. What I do have a problem with is industrialized palm oil, you know, grown on these massive plantations and then being used in processed foods, and with the lion's share of the profits going to these multinationals like Nestle and PepsiCo that are using cheap palm oil in these processed foods. So I just wanted to make that distinction.
You know, there's much been spoken about. There's a question that came in that the poor people in India, I mean, they need low cost,
Right.
you know, oil. Your oil might be low cost, but at the end of the day, the amount you're spending on health is going to shoot up to the point where you're not, and the resistance is low. And the fact is that I think that we are actually engaged, JOCELYN. This is what I sadly believe at the last departure lounge part of my life, that we're engaged in the ultimate colonization adventure. It's called intergenerational colonization. Up to now, we were geographically colonizing people. And if we colonize the air, the water, the sustainability, the food, the capacity of soil to grow food, and leave our children the equivalent of, then they're going to remember us really well. If they build a statue, you can be sure that the eggs will be thrown at it. You know?
They'll knock that one down.
Yeah.
I am the epilogue from my book is I don't know if you saw it. It's from Frantz Fanon, the
Yes.
Wretched of the Earth. For a colonized people, the most essential value, because it is the most meaningful, is first and foremost the land which must provide bread and naturally dignity. So yeah, that idea of colonization is very running current throughout the book. From the beginning, when the European traders started sourcing palm oil from West Africa, and then going over to Southeast Asia and growing it there.
Just look, you know, it's so important what you've done by putting this thing down, because there are good people, there are very good people who would put their money into palm oil because they do think that it's going to feed the world. I would love from you to condense your, you know, sorry, could you just give us a précis of your book and its lessons? It would be wonderful, because the good people need to hear your story.
Okay. First of all, I'll show you. There's two versions. This is the UK version and the American version. So I can just sort of walk you through it. As I said, I start in West Africa. Well, I start the prologue is when I went down to Liberia, that trip that I told you, when I sort of, you know, opened my eyes to the existence of oil palm, and then I sort of started traveling around the world, including in India, to sort of look at different aspects of it. So I wanted to find out sort of the historical aspect, and that's when I learned that basically the palm oil trade replaced the slave trade in West Africa. There was sort of an infrastructure in the Niger Delta, with these rivers going up into the interior, where they used to shuttle people down through these rivers, and then they would be taken across the Atlantic. And when the slave trade was outlawed, they started sourcing palm oil from that same infrastructure. And many of the slave traders then became traders in palm oil, sent it off to Europe mainly for margarines and candles at the time, and then eventually became, you know, an industrialized foodstuff. It also went across the Atlantic to Brazil with the slaves, And you may or may not be aware, dende oil is palm oil. That's the Brazilian name. And it's a huge part of the cuisine there. Again, it's mostly not, I mean, there now are industrial plantations as well, but it's also that red palm oil, the same way you'll get it in West Africa, that the dende oil in their cuisine. So that's one part of the book. I sort of trace the history and its connections to the slave trade. Then I go to what was the Belgian Congo with a man named William Lever, who was the founder of Unilever. So he went into the Belgian Congo, and this was after King Leopold had basically raped the place, murdered 10 million people, I believe, all told, in sourcing rubber and ivory. So they finally got rid of him, and then this William Lever comes along and he says, "Oh, I'm a good Christian, and I want to help sort of educate people and give them good jobs." And he went in there and basically used slave labor as well to grow his oil palm. They would take men from their families, from their villages to these plantations. And back then, now to source, we haven't talked about the oil palm tree. I guess if the audience is mostly in India, maybe you're familiar with it. But back then, before it was sort of bred to be squatter, the trees you'll see now in Southeast Asia have wide trunks and they're shorter. But in its natural state and in West Africa, they tend to be very tall with thin trunks. And so they would need men to climb up there basically and get the oil palm fruits down there. They come in these big bunches, and then the little oil palm, the fruits are in there. So they basically forced them, and they put a head tax on the citizens, and because there was no money, so they basically had to work to pay off this tax. Anyway, so then I go to the Belgian Congo with William Lever and talk about how basically he, used slave labor to source the palm oil to send back to, and built his fortune. And then I go to Southeast Asia. So around the turn of the century, after synthetic rubber came along, a lot of the planters, mostly Europeans, Scandinavians in Southeast Asia, in Dutch East Indies and Malaya at the time, replaced their rubber with oil palm, and that's when. And then over the decades, the industry just grew and grew. It was also, once those countries got independence, they were very poor, and they were looking to sort of feed their population. So that a lot of the governments gave people plots of land and oil palm, and had them said to grow oil palm. So it was sort of a, again, the best intentions, right? It was a poverty alleviation scheme, and then it just grew and grew and grew. After that, I go to, then I sort of trace the whole growth of the industry in Southeast Asia, which people probably know that's the center of it now. 85% of the palm oil produced worldwide comes from Indonesia and Malaysia combined. And then I went to Honduras and Guatemala to look at mainly labor issues. As I referenced, a lot of the oil palm there is grown on land that was owned by United Fruit, and a lot of echoes of that system, the banana trade and pineapple, and taking people's land and cheap labor. So looked at labor issues in mainly in Honduras, but I also reported on labor issues in Malaysia and Indonesia. There's been some press on that, so viewers might be familiar. There was a piece in the Associated Press. There was a series about sort of the impact on women and children working in the palm plantations, and a lot of sexual abuse and just exposure to chemicals, and carrying heavy loads, which had the effect a lot of them lost their pregnancies. And then I go to India. The title of that chapter is "The World is Fat," and I've got a Wendell Berry quote: "People are fed by the food industry, which pays no attention to health, and are healed by the health industry, which pays no attention to food." So that whole chapter is about what we've been discussing. The next one is called "Smog over Singapore," and that one I actually went undercover with some folks in Sumatra. Their organization is called Eyes on the Forest. So what they do is sort of trace oil palm fruits grown in national parks and in other places where it's illegal to grow them, and they basically will drive through the night following these trucks to the mill, because the companies that the palm oil companies and the traders generally say, we trace our source of oil to the mill, and that's how you know that it's legitimate. And the oil palm fruit, you have to use it when it's fresh, like within 24 hours it starts to degrade. So the thinking is that if the mill is here, this fruit must have come from, a radius about this far because you have to get there in 24 hours. But as I mentioned, some of these trucks will like drive through the night, sometimes change their license plates in order to hide the fact that this fruit was grown on illegal places. And then that fruit gets to the mill, and then it goes to the refinery, and it tends to get mixed in with palm oil from other places. And that's why it's so difficult. The supply chains are so long. That's why it's so difficult for people to say, oh, I know that all my palm oil is sustainable, because there's a lot of this unsustainable stuff that gets in places, and then it gets all mixed into the same system. And so that chapter, I'm undercover with those guys. Here's a picture of them just from behind. It was an amazing trip. As I said, I was in Sumatra. I don't speak Bahasa Indonesia. They didn't speak English, so we were together for about 5 days on the road, just tracing these trucks. A lot of sign language, and that one is also about climate change, because in Sumatra a lot of the land is peatland, which, as you know, is it's like compressed carbon.
Absolutely.
And so part of the reason these guys are so intent on tracing the illegal palm is because a lot of it is grown on this carbon-rich land that it's just an enormous threat to our common environment. And then the next chapter is called Nutella and Other Smears, and that's when I talk about the industry itself and its sort of public relations campaigns and some of the nasty, the way they go after some of the folks who come out and say negative things about the industry. Also, as I mentioned, that World Health Organization report looking into the way the industry operates. And what's interesting about the industry is, like, the defenders say, oh, these are all small farmers, and if you're against palm oil, or if you say anything negative about palm oil, you're hurting these small farmers. But in fact, there's a report that the small farmers, I think in Malaysia, make an average of $7,000 a year, and and the family size is at least four children or 4 people. So basically, they're living at the poverty line. And the 2018 report, I have the statistic here. I thought it was so incredible. 2018 report by Tuck Indonesia, which is an NGO that advocates for environmental justice. But the estimated total wealth of the top 27 families in the industry at more than $88 billion, 8% of the country's gross domestic product. So those profits are very concentrated among a small group of people. And then the end of the book, I sort of look at some campaigns trying to raise awareness about the environmental problems attached to palm oil and some of the gains that have been made.
God.
And one last thing, and then I do talk about synthetic palm oil. There are a couple different operations that are working on that. So that could be a bright spot if it could save rainforests from being chopped down for palm oil.
Well, JOCELYN, have we not got our homework cut out for us? And we're passing on the homework we don't do to our kids. But I want to just communicate to you something that across the world, we've got a job on hand. If you take children, I work with them. I have no right to foist on them the kind of psychological trauma. I mean, ecological grief is not just a thing. It's a medical condition now. So,
I think we're all feeling it.
Yeah, we're all feeling it. But just imagine a child who's 11 or 12 years old. I mean, I grew up playing football and cricket and this and that and the other. These kids are growing up with fear. So here is what I tell the children. What I tell them is that nature is self-repairing. Would you like to live in a magic house? The doors are made of chocolate, the windows are made of lollipop, you open the tap and you get lemonade and you go to sleep, and then the next morning everything, boom, it's come back to life. That's what nature is. It's a magic machine. And I liken it also to the Titanic, that look, when the iceberg has hit our Titanic right now, we can see that. But in the case of the Titanic, in the boiler room, I mean, there were people saying, what are you doing? Get this thing out, pump the thing. And in the stateroom, people were playing Blue Danube and arguing, no, I want to have Swan Lake, and somebody saying my champagne's not cold. But on the deck, you have the deckhands freezing to death. And they're saying, look at these idiots down over there having fun. We're freezing, so let's start a little fire, and they're burning the lifeboats. We're all on the same damn Titanic. And what I'm telling the children, the difference between the Titanic and your home, the biosphere, is that the Titanic couldn't fix its own hull. The biosphere can. Just leave it be, and it'll start bringing things back to balance. I do really think, we have Chunky from Gantok who had asked a question that what's the solution? The solution is to flow with nature's tide, use nature-based solutions, and create massive employment around the world to bring back ecosystems. Not that we have to plant trees. Right. The bees, the butterflies, the birds, the monkeys, the elephant, all these are the gardeners of our Eden. We have to bring balance back, not by ourselves. We are the least equipped to green the earth. Homo sapiens should actually be called Homo stupidus, according to me, you know. And
there's actually a piece of Biden's plan. Sadly, I think it's been taken out because the Republicans are against it. But it's called the Civilian Climate Corps, I believe. And it's similar to Peace Corps. As I mentioned, I was a Peace Corps volunteer. So the idea is that you give all these young people, you employ them, planting trees and changing infrastructure so that we can use electric cars and doing the total overhaul that we all need to do to move away from fossil fuels. So I do think governments, I don't think it's just going to be people walking out and planting trees. I think governments need to take charge and start making policies that change.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There was a law possible law introduced by Brian Schatz of Hawaii, I think just about two weeks ago, linking products, palm oil, other products related to deforestation in other places that, it would punish companies that are importing products linked to deforestation. And I think there's a law in the books in the UK to do the same thing. So I do think I think governments need to start stepping up and changing laws in the face of this crisis too.
Well, I think there must be some questions that other people have to ask. And JOCELYN, I just want to say to you that thank you for writing that book, because I read a lot. I mean, from David Quammen to, you name it. I'm reading about this collapse and all these various books. And the way I deal with ecological grief is to do something about it. And it makes that just a little more tolerable. And really, whether it's Malaysia, Indonesia, whether it's Africa, or for that matter, even if it happens to be the north of Europe, we're all governed by the same laws. And I would truly, truly like to leave this audience, as well as their children, with this little touch of hope that the planet knows how to fix itself. So when the kids see that it actually does happen, I think that their focus then shifts to their elders to say that, listen, I know you love me, but don't do this to me, and this is why. So we need to work at the tri-junction of biodiversity, economics, and climate change. Under this umbrella comes human rights, food security, social security, education, girl child, women's rights, human rights, everything comes under this. I don't see an option. I don't think there are two ways we can go. There are no two paths now. There's only one path. Work with nature. Nature needs half. This is what the IUCN is saying. This is what everyone is saying now. If we do this, JOCELYN,
30%, 30 by 30.
They mentioned 30 by 30 because you can't get to the 6th floor without walking up to the 3rd, But if it's not 50%, it's like your liver. Your liver can take a lot of damage with single malts or rum. But if you damage it beyond 70%, then you're sunk. You don't have to drink another ounce of alcohol. It'll collapse on its own. And that's what we're doing to the planet.
Here's a question that will sort of tie back to this conversation. So John from Goa says, how did you come across inspiring stories of hope from your travels? So I basically just, I would read a lot online about sort of what was happening in countries where I knew the industry was. And I also worked a lot with various NGOs. So I got in touch with the folks from Friends of the Earth, the Rainforest Action Network, which is based in Oakland, California. They do amazing work, a lot of palm oil work. Global Witness, as I mentioned before, they look at the connection between crime and natural resources. Greenpeace, and seems to me there's one other. Anyway, all of those organizations are really right on this issue. So I would recommend, people are saying what sort of are the solutions. I do think that, the power is with the people, that we educate ourselves. And a way to do that is to go to the websites of these various organizations. They're sort of always working on different campaigns, social media campaigns. Sometimes they're out, chanting in front of the PepsiCo shareholder meetings, saying get conflict palm oil out of your chips, other products, cereals, I guess. Anyway, so I think, rather than just talk about it, is we need to sort of raise our voices, make these corporations aware that we care about it. Otherwise, they're not going to do anything. Why would they? They just want to make money. That's the reason for being.
I mean, there's so much resonance in what you say, what we experience, what I feel, what I know. I can just tell you this, just that more than all the shouting in the world, self-interest comes first. At the moment when you say that, it comes the large corporation self-interest. I'm talking about the self-interest of people who just want a stable life. The purpose of life is not permanent growth on a planet that's finite. The purpose of life is stability, it's equilibrium. This is what mothers want for their children. They want to see them healthy, they want to see them happy. And I believe at this point, one of the strongest strategies to actually fight the destruction of the biosphere is to have equitable distribution of resources. Now, when that happens, somebody like President Trump would say, oh, you're a communist because you want to distribute things equitably. No, I'm not a communist. I just happen to be somebody who believes it's not a good idea to steal from somebody and put it in your bank. Yeah. So if we are able to do this, and I think we will, using the young as our leaders, that we will be able to work with the insurance lot, we will have to work with the banks, we'll have to work with the next generation of industrialists. It's not going to be easy, but I promise you this, human beings do not yet have the technology to destroy life on Earth. Things will come back to balance. As yet, I mean, if we damage our atmosphere, then we're just another rock in space. But at this moment in time, we have a hope in hell. There is just that slim chance that we'll do it, and the young will do it for us. And I want to work with the young, with people. Jane Goodall, for instance, God bless her. She's an apostle of hope. And I think that between hope and working with nature, we have the armor that my generation doesn't have. My generation doesn't have the time to actually destroy the planet, but they're trying very hard.
Going back to your point about people just trying to get by and feed their kids, basically. There's a story in the book that I was reporting in Sumatra, and it was a region where I spent some time with these guys who were poaching helmeted hornbills. So these are these birds that have these amazing solid casts. Yeah. It's like red color, and they call it red ivory. It's used a lot for carving trinkets and things, mainly for the Chinese market. Anyway, these guys, where they lived before had been forest, and they got their food, they got their building materials, they got their medicine, they got everything from the forest. Now this forest had been knocked down for oil palm plantations, which made it easier for them to sort of get further in. And they were shooting these helmeted hornbills because they could sell them easily and they could make enough money. I think they said to feed their family for a month or something. And the guys, I mean, they were nice guys. They were criminals because they were shooting these endangered birds. But they said to me, one of them said, he showed me his rifle and he said he had it like, he had paid to have it modified because it shot a certain kind of bullet, and these bullets were small and sometimes they didn't kill the birds on impact. And like it broke their heart to see these birds suffering. So he paid to have his gun modified so it could take a bigger bullet, so it would kill the bird. And they were like, we don't want to kill these birds. We would do anything else if we had an option for other, another way to make money. It was basically, our water's been polluted. We can't forage in the forest anymore. So it is this trickle down thing. And again, yeah, it's this poverty is driving so much of it. Because those profits are being held onto by a very few.
It's like a never ending, it's like a conveyor of problems and a conveyor of solutions. And the issue of population, for instance, India, where we got a large population and people talk in terms of sheer numbers. I see the population problem as being a huge one, and it's not just because of our numbers, it's because the amount that we consume is going up. So if you take, let's say, somebody in America, 1,000 people in America consuming as much as 10,000 people in India, then multiply the population and then you'll know how much, because the earth doesn't care how many feet step on it, it cares how much you take off it. So we've got to reduce, we got to tear ourselves apart from the idea that happiness comes from consuming more. And we've got to find somewhere inside us. I believe we will. It's the only thing I can believe sitting in the departure lounge, that I will be happy because JOCELYN is happy, you know. And it sounds like pie in the sky. It's not pie in the sky, because that's the best security I can have. That's the best social security I can have. That's the best everything I can have. You know, if you come down to it, who's going to buy toothpaste if you wiped out all the money that they have and all they can afford to buy is food? You're killing the markets by destroying the climate, destabilizing it, and you don't have to do it. Our children will remember us much better, I would believe, JOCELYN. I think you and I are quite united on this. Yeah, we're on the same page.
And going back, you also mentioned sort of gender issues and women and girl issues. That, as I'm sure you know, the population question. I mean, when you educate girls, they tend to have far fewer children. So that's, you know, that also comes back to that population question. It's a question of
everything.
Girls.
I tell you, JOCELYN, look, we don't have any choices, really. It seems like we've got so many choices. We don't have that many choices. The issue of testosterone-ridden, GDP pushing, XYZ, these are zombies. These are dead men walking. They don't understand. Oil, coal, gas is gone. It'll be used for 50 years, but it won't grow. So the same way I'm saying to you right now, that I would actually wind this up from my side, and I'd like you to have the last word, JOCELYN, on this. I'd wind it up by saying that, look, I look forward to younger people wanting hammocks, sitting in the sun, sipping a little bit of water, enjoying a sunset, and not necessarily saying, my car is bigger than your car, I am taller, I am stronger, I have more money, I have this. Happiness, I think, is Bhutan's trying to teach us that, a tiny little country saying gross national happiness.
Right.
You know, so
well,
so
thank you for teaching them.
Well, but it's still a beautiful world, huh? Please believe me, it is still a beautiful, beautiful world, and we are living through the most interesting times of human history right now. And the young children. One last thing that I love these children, and what I say to them is, I lived a funeral every day of my life. Something I loved died, something I wanted was ruined. You guys, because you're working with nature, nature will repair itself. Those wetlands will come back to life. Those corals will come back to life. Those mud flats will be filled with birds again. All you have to do is stop damaging it. Just give it a holiday. We are in an ICU, intensive conservation unit. That's what the planet is. Not an intensive care unit. And when you go into an ICU, they don't say, give me 10, run, do it. They say, rest a little. Let the planet rest. I think palm oil would be a misplaced ambition. And I thank you for writing that book. And I hope that you will come down to India at some point and we can show you tigers roaming free.
I would love to do that. Thank you so much. It's been a delight to chat with you today. I really appreciate it.
Totally my pleasure, JOCELYN. Okay. Thank you very much for writing that book. Seriously. I want an autographed copy and I want to buy it. So I will order it off.
I'll handle it when I come to India.
Okay, good. Is that a deal?
It's a deal, yeah.
Okay, good.
For years. Okay.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. Thanks. You very much. And I really want to thank Khushwant Singh for making this happen, you know, because that man was marvelous. He represented everything that was good about India. And I hope we can laugh at ourselves like he used to. Okay, this is your show now.
Indeed. Thank you so much indeed, Bittu, and also JOCELYN. for a very stimulating and instructive discussion, which went way beyond the question of palm oil and its implications. But it was necessary. And it reflects, as you rightly said, Ritu, it reflects Khushwant Singh's commitment to ecological issues, which were close to his heart. It's that sentiment has been continued by the Khushwant Singh Literary Festival organizers, who plant a tree. It's a small gesture, but they plant a tree for every speaker. And so over 10 lit fests, as there will be by the end of this one, there have been, on an average, probably about 30 per session. And so by that, 3,000 trees. It's their contribution to both to the ecology and as well as to the memory of Khushwant Singh. If I were to very quickly summarize what you've said, there are 3 C's that I walk away with. Number 1 is corruption, personal and at the state level. I think we can't absolve ourselves and we can't absolve the state. It's institutional. The second is corporate greed. It seems to be like a sewer, not a golden thread, but a sewer that runs through all commercial activity of the 21st century. And the third, and this is something that you had touched upon, JOCELYN, and I'm going to stick my neck out here, and that is crimes against humanity. We keep going through, they're talking about crimes and, the Bosnians and here, nobody has questioned the role of the Belgian royal family in the depredation, all right, victimization of people, the complete rape of mineral resources, etc. All of it for the personal benefit of the monarch. It wasn't for the Belgian state. It was his, the Congo was his private property, his asset, like Sandringham was. Okay? It was, and not a peep has been mentioned by anybody about the fact that until Congo was declared independent, and King Baudouin went there to declare independence, until then, the royal family was benefiting personally from all of this. You talked in your book about slavery, you've talked about depredation, etc. But there's a kind of, how can I put it, a blanket that has been placed over this. And I think that it's time that we did hold people accountable in the same way as we hold ourselves accountable. But that is a long shot. Let me end with a quotation, unrelated, but I think it has a resonance in this. I don't know whether you've seen the film or read the book, the play, Man for All Seasons by Robert Bolt. It's the story of Sir Thomas More. And he's being asked to support King Henry VIII's request to divorce Catherine of Aragon and to go to the Pope. So Thomas More, a principled man, refuses. Thomas Cromwell, his assistant, comes to him and tries to persuade him and said, but why don't you? I mean, why don't you do it? I mean, it's just a law. And he makes this observation, and if you'll have to interpret this in the context of what you've been saying. He said, England, this is Sir Thomas More replying, England is populated thick with laws. If you knock down every law that there is, then under which last law will you seek refuge? Under which last tree will we seek shade? And that is the challenge that faces mankind. We can't afford to be as negligent and casual in our approach to nature, and greedy, as you rightly said. But thank you so much indeed on behalf of the Khushwant Singh Literary Festival 2021, the organizers. May I thank both of you for a very stimulating and positive. I'd say positive because, as Bittu has mentioned, we are in the departure lounge. It's the persons who are coming into the arrivals, hopefully with their vaccinations, but those who are coming as such. But thank you both so much indeed. Now, for our viewers, a prelude of tomorrow's program, day 2 will have Indra Chandrasekhar. She'll be replacing me as the anchor, and she'll be acting as the host. And the sessions will be first session will be on the 7 sins of being a mother. And since I'm not one, but a father, I understand that there's a kind of gender bias here. And the next one is going to be on royals, rebels, and the Sikh Empire. And the last one is going to be on Afghanistan, the long war. They're going to be, obviously, moderators and speakers, but I think I would encourage you to go to the programs and they'll be able to see who there is and attend the sessions tomorrow. But thank you both once again for a very interesting and stimulating discussion. And we look forward to more of them in future LitFests. Thank you very much indeed, viewers, for being with us. And I'll sign off now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Thanks.